Good evening, everyone. A very, very warm welcome to a special evening here today with 21K School. I, Cinderella Bose, along with my two passionate students, Myra Khattar and Venkatraman Patnaik, welcome you to a phenomenal evening today. It is with great honor and pride that we say we have among us Mr. Raja Chari, renowned NASA astronaut. I won't take much time. My two young learners are eager to do the introductions for Mr. Chari themselves. So over to Venkat. Venkat, all yours.
You miss. Um, okay. Yeah. Thank you, Miss, for that great introduction. So I'll quickly start. Good evening, everyone. I'm Venkatraman Patnaik, and I'll be introducing you. I'll be taking this opportunity to introduce you Mr. Raja Chari's uh, early history and his educational experience. So let me quickly get started. Mr. Chari was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Uh, and was further raised in the Cedar Falls of Iowa. He earned his bachelor's. He graduated from the Columbus High School in Waterloo, Iowa, and earned his bachelor's degree in astronautical engineering from the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado. He earned a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School in the Patterson River, Maryland, and he also graduated from the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Now, without further ado, may I further request Myra Khattar to enlighten us about Mr. Chari's experience in NASA and space flights. So, over to you, Myra.
Thank you so much, Venkat. Mr. Raja Chari was selected by NASA to join the 2017 astronaut candidate class. He was reported for duty in August 2017. He completed 2 years of training as an astronaut candidate. Commendable. He then served as the director of the Joint Test Team for NASA Commercial Crew Program. He served as the commander of the NASA SpaceX Crew 3 mission to the ISS, which launched on November 10th, 2021. He served as a flight engineer aboard the International Space Station for 177 days. During his time on the space station, he performed 2 spacewalks and helped in capturing and releasing 3 SpaceX Dragon spacecraft and 2 Cygnus cargo vehicles. Today, Mr. Chari will be sharing his NASA experiences with us, which will truly be awesome for all of us. So please join us in welcoming Mr. Raja Chari.
Thank you very much, Myra and Venkat. You guys definitely did your homework. I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll have some fun talking through, like you mentioned, talking through my experience in space, and excited to be able to do that with you guys today. So if you notice in the upper left there of the screen, that's actually a picture of the northeast coast of India that I took from space. So what I wanted to talk through today, and hopefully you guys can all hear me, so someone stop me if you're not, just kind of quickly go through my background. Venkat and Myra did a great job, so I'll go quickly through that. Talk a little bit about how we train for spaceflight at NASA, I'll play a video that kind of shows from start to finish our mission on the space station. And then the most important thing is getting to hear your guys' questions and what I can answer. So one thing I wanted to, you kind of mentioned where I grew up, and a lot of times people ask what they should do to be an astronaut. And the thing I tell them is that there's not one way. So my particular way is my dad came from India, met my mom in Wisconsin, and then my dad had a job for a company called John Deere that makes tractors. And that company happened to be in Iowa. So that's how I wound up there. But as you probably have figured out, my dad has, my roots go back to India on my dad's side. And specifically my grandfather was also very much into STEM before that. Before it was called STEM, he was the head of the mathematics department at Osmania and actually went to the real Cambridge in England. So I went to the Cambridge in Massachusetts. He went to the real Cambridge and got his PhD in an incredibly short amount of time right after World War II. And then the bottom right picture, that is Hyderabad at night, which is where my father and his family grew up. So I've been a lot of places in the US and outside the US. I'm not going to go through all these, but the thing I do want to point out to you is that more than half of my life I've been training. So whether it's been in school or learning to fly or learning to do things. So one of the cool things about our job at NASA is we're always training. So whether we're learning to do geology, whether it's learning to do biology, astronomy, we're always getting to learn. And that's, I think, a very important skill is to realize that you're never really done learning ever in your life. The first place I worked, my first office was what's called the F-15. And so that's a fighter jet in the US Air Force. And then the place I was, my last place I was working was in the F-35 at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And that's, we were doing the testing for that. So I was originally a pilot in the Air Force. And then like Venkat mentioned, went to test pilot school and then did test flying after that. When I got to NASA, I'd already had essentially one career with the Air Force and had to kind of start over, which was kind of a cool thing to get to start learning all over again. So some of the things we work on are systems. So just like your house has a plumbing system, a cooling system, an electrical system, we have all those same systems both on the spacecraft, so on the Dragon, which is in the upper left there, and then we also have all those things on the ISS, or the International Space Station. And a lot of our training is understanding how those things work, but more importantly, how to fix those things when they break, because they do break. We also do flight training. And so we obviously fly the spacecraft, but we actually fly airplanes too. And the reason we fly airplanes at NASA is that is a lot of the same skill sets, and we use it to learn to work together as a team. And so in an airplane, when you're making decisions or mistakes, the plane's still moving. And so you have to very quickly learn how to reset after a mistake, figure out what you did wrong, but then move on to the next thing. And so it's a really close analog to space flight where the same thing is happening. The spacecraft's moving, so you don't get to pause and discuss everything. And so sometimes you have to make quick decisions, and sometimes you have to think about it and the crew, and you have to learn how to know when do you have time and when do you not have time. The other thing we have to learn to do is how to rendezvous and dock. So if any of you played catch with the ball, it's the same process. You know, you have to figure out where to put your hands to catch the ball that's coming towards you. And in our case, we are the ball, and the space station has got to catch us, but we have to drive ourselves to the space station and dock. And so it takes anywhere between 2 hours and 3 days, depending on how much fuel we want to use and what what we call the phasing of the orbit, meaning how the orbits line up when we launch. And if everything works out good, then we don't really have to do anything. We, the crew, the vehicle should do it on its own. But we spend most of our time training for things to go wrong. Most of our training for both the space station and for the Dragon capsule, we train for all the different failures or things that could break. But if everything works well, then hopefully we can just enjoy and monitor. We also use robotics a lot in space, and we have to learn about robotics. And so the pictures there, you're seeing that this is a cargo vehicle called a Cygnus, which you'll see in the video as well. So this robotic arm is huge. It's tens of meters long. And in this picture, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but at the very end of it, there's a person, just to give you a sense of how big that thing is. So we use the arm to do repairs outside the station. We use it to capture vehicles that are coming to bring us supplies and let them set them go. We use them to move people around when they're doing spacewalks. And then we have a control station inside the station that we use to run it. EVA means extravehicular activity, which is a spacewalk. And that's probably the hardest thing we have to learn how to do, and the most time we spend training on the ground, because it's physically hard and it's very mentally, you have to keep up a high level of attention for a very long time. So the day you do spacewalks, it's about a 14 to 16 hour day, and you only have 32 ounces of water in the spacesuit. So it's a very long day, and you're very physically tired at the end of it. And we spend a lot of time training to make sure we know exactly how to get around on the space station. We also have to get smart on the science we're going to do on orbit. So like Myra mentioned, that we do initial training at NASA when we first start, about 2 years. But then once you get assigned to a flight, you actually start training for that specific flight. And a lot of that training is the science. So in the time we were on orbit, we did about 350 experiments, and you'll see some of those in the video. But we have to learn enough about each of those little things to be able to help the scientists on the ground. So sometimes the experiments don't work, which is kind of why we're doing the research. But then we try to help the scientists figure out, like, what are some ideas maybe we could get it to work, or some other things to change. All right, I'm gonna play the video here. I'm gonna try. I don't think the audio is gonna work, but which is fine. I'm just gonna talk while it's going. And so this was our crew before, which was called Crew 3, which was the group that went to the International Space Station. There's 3 Americans and then 1 German. Matthias Maurer was the German astronaut in our group. And then 3 of us, myself, Kayla, Matthias, in the picture there, were all rookie space flyers, meaning we had never been to space before. And then Tom, who's standing up there, this was his 3rd time in space. So he flew on a space shuttle, on a Soyuz, and now on the Dragon. So I mentioned the science training. That's what you're seeing here. So a lot of the experiments we do in space, we first do on the ground to set what's called a baseline, and for us to get familiar with the experiments. We also do robotics virtual reality training, which is what you saw there. And then this is the planes we use. I mentioned we do flight training. So this is Tom and I flying, which we did. And then the fact that we fly together in the jet makes it a lot easier for us to work together in the spacecraft. And so we use T-38s at NASA, which are the trainer jets we use in the Air Force when people are learning to fly. This is how we practice robotics on the ground in that virtual reality trainer. And then I mentioned the hardest thing we do training and in flight is spacewalk training. And so we have this giant pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, which is what you're seeing here. So this is Kayla in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, basically practicing for the spacewalk that she's going to later do on orbit. We also have simulators at SpaceX, which is out in Hawthorne, that have the SpaceX vehicle. So we can essentially practice everything we would do on the real day of launch inside the simulators. And the idea is to be so familiar that by the time you get to launch day, which is here, you've seen it all, and there's no surprises. So where we launch the Dragon out of is in Cape Kennedy, which is in Florida. And what you're seeing here is the day of launch. We start about 6 hours before the actual launch itself and get suited up. Now, these suits are different than the ones you saw with the spacewalk. These are launch and entry suits, which is pretty common. Every vehicle has a launch and entry suit that protects us if there's a cabin depressurization, basically a hole in the spacecraft, and it keeps us alive long enough to come back to Earth. But these suits, you definitely could not do a spacewalk in. Whereas the big spacesuits that we do spacewalks in, those wouldn't fit inside the capsule. So that's why we have 2 different kinds. So we actually get on the vehicle way before it actually launches, because they have to do a whole bunch of checks before the actual liftoff time. This is the inside of the crew access arm. That's the connection between the structure of the launch pad and the rocket and the vehicle itself. So they load us up. We come across 2 by 2, and you can see all those people in the black outfits. The reason they have those outfits on is to keep any part, any hair, dust, or any debris from getting inside the capsule or on the hatch seals. So there's a what's called a clean room that's attached to the end of the arm, and we call it the white room, and that's what protects anything from getting inside. Once we're seated in the capsule and strapped in, you can see they rotate the seats, and that puts us in a configuration where when we launch, all the force is going through our chest. And so when you launch, it's about 4 to 5 what we call G's, which is force pushing through your chest, which makes it kind of hard to breathe. You see the arm pulls back, and then the rocket ignites. There's 2 stages for the Falcon 9. So the first stage gets us about as high as an airplane flies, and then that falls off and returns back to Earth. And the second stage takes us the rest of the way to space. We had a night launch, which is pretty cool. And then my family, my kids and my wife were on the top of this building, this flattish building. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but to the right of the really tall building. That's where they watch from. You can see on the bottom of the first stage, there's 9 rockets. You can kind of see some of them there, 9 engines. and those throttle as we're climbing. So it's not a solid rocket like on the Artemis system. It's a liquid fueled rocket, which means you can throttle it. At about 8 minutes, the second stage cuts off, and at that point, you're in orbit. We give the vehicle some time to settle out, and then this is what you're seeing here is the Dragon capsule separating from the second stage. And so now the capsule is in free flight. So about 8 minutes to get into orbit, another 4 minutes to stabilize, and then we're in free flight. There's 2 mission controls. There's a Houston mission control and a SpaceX mission control, which is in Hawthorne. Those are some of our first views outside the window of Dragon. And then when we flew over Germany for the first time, Matthias was able to call down via Houston and had some time to show what it was like being in space. You see Kayla holding our 0G indicator, which is a turtle, since our 2017 class was the turtles. And so pretty fun to be able to eat and throw food. You got a little practice. About one of the coolest things I think we remember from launch is when we first saw the space station. So we were about 40 kilometers away. We were able to see it. The sun hit it, and so it looked kind of like a golden ornament hanging out in space. And this is us now docking with the space station. These are the views from the space station. This is our view from the capsule. This is what we see as we're approaching. That target in the middle, that cross, is what we're using as an aiming reference. And then we've opened the nose cone of the Dragon to expose the docking mechanism. So that connects. This is on the space station now. Mark Vande Hei spent a year on the space station. We spent his second 6 months, we were there with him. And as you can see, as we come onto the space station, we're still trying to figure out, we're still getting used to microgravity. So he's kind of helping catch us and then restrain us. You can also get a sense of how much stuff there is on the space station. So all around, there's bags. Any free space there is, we have bags full of cargo, equipment, experiments, as we have to store everything up there. There's not closets per se. So on our time, once we were on board, then there were 7 of us in what's called Expedition 66. So there was 4 Americans, myself, Tom, Kayla, and Mark Vande Hei. Matthias was the German, and then 2 Russian cosmonauts, Anton and Pyotr. And Pyotr also spent a year up there. So he and Mark both were doing long duration space flights. So once we were on board, it was time to get to work. I mentioned that we do mostly science, and so we had to get right down to it. So just like a lab here on Earth, we have what's called cryogenic coolers, because we do a lot of research where we need to freeze samples and eventually return them to Earth. But we have to wait until there's cargo space to do that. So we have freezers to keep them in until that happens. This is a centrifuge that Matthias is putting together, where we can spin plants at different levels of gravity and see what that stresses their cells. This is that same experiment you saw us practicing on the ground, except now we're doing in space. We did a lot of plant research up there, so we know how to grow plants in space, but it takes a lot of time, like crew time, to do. And so we're trying to find better ways to automate that, because we don't have a whole lot of crew time to spend on it. And as we go to the moon and Mars, we can't spend all our time just monitoring the plants. We need to be able to automate that process. And it turns out to be harder than you'd think. A lot of our research is human research on us. So I'm showing here how we learn to take our own blood. We do, this is one of the ways we exercise. These are self-flying autonomous drones, basically, that are flying in space. And then Tom and I are working on, this is a combustion research thing. So the way flame behaves and propagates in space is very different in microgravity, which can lead to hopefully some improvements in combustion engines that would allow us to have a lot less carbon emissions. This is what you saw Kayla working on was actually an airlock that we can put experiments outside and then bring them back in. And then also, just like a lab, you'll see several pictures of us using these, what are called glove boxes. Our favorite part of the space station for the crew is the cupola. So this is the window that looks down, and I'm kind of showing that in this picture. These have shutters over them. So when we're not in there, we actually close the shutters to protect any debris from potentially hitting the window, which could cause damage. But there's a downward looking window and then several angled windows. And so that's where we hang out whenever we've got free time. This is some more of the human research. So Kayla's looking at Matthias's eye pressure with an instrument here and then recording that. And we're looking at, we do all these things several times. Anything that has like a toxic element or that needs to be super clean, we do in the glove box. And that's what Tom's working on, some skin cell research in here. And so all the experiments have to be set up to be able to work in microgravity. And so a lot of times the researchers may spend years trying to figure out how to adapt the things that they've tested on the ground to make them work in space. The way we get supplies on the station and take trash back home from the station is through cargo vehicles. And so the Russians have a Soyuz and a Progress, which are essentially the same vehicle, but one has people and one doesn't. And that's what theirs look like. That screen looks like is what they see when they're doing the rendezvous. I mentioned we did 3 spacewalks. Well, you guys, Myra mentioned that. I did 2 spacewalks. We did 3 total as an expedition. The first one was Tom and Kayla going out to fix an antenna that had broken on the space station. And so we use multiple what we call bands, which are different frequencies and types of antennas to command and control the station. And before we got there, one of those had broken, one of what we call the S-band antenna. So we had one left, but we never want to only have one of anything. We want redundancy. So they went out and fixed it. And then Matthias and I, this is a view of Tom in the arm. Remember I said before, we use the arm to fly people. So we flew Tom in the arm to go get the spare, which was somewhere else in the space station. About 3 hours a day we work out. So you can see we can do anything on the ground that you can do with like a bar or a cable, and Matthias is working out here. And then we also have the ability to do cardio with both the bike you saw before, and then this is the treadmill. And you can see those bungees attached to Kayla's waist. That's what gives you the sensation and fools your body into thinking there's actually a load pulling down on you. We have to do all the same hygiene you do on the ground. So whether it's keeping your hair cut, brushing your teeth, and then probably the most fun part of the day is eating. So at least once a week, we would have a group dinner, sort of a buffet style, where we would bring little treats that maybe people had sent up to them and share them with the whole crew. And it's really easy to share food in space because you can just float it over to someone else, or you can just leave it floating in the middle for someone else to come and grab. I mentioned the cupola, and we have the robotics set up, and that's what you saw in that view there. As the vehicles come and go, I mentioned some are cargo vehicles, a lot have people on them too. So that shot there was a new Soyuz had come up, and we had some new people, and then they went back. We spent Christmas time up there, so Kayla had made the crew gifts, and we also made 3-dimensional Christmas cookies, because in space, in microgravity, you can actually make the frosting go up. It doesn't settle down. So you can actually make designs that are 3-dimensional. This is where we eat. That's node 1, which was called the galley area. While we were there, the Russians also significantly increased the size of the space station. So they added a module, and what you can see is they're doing a spacewalk now to attach that. This is with a cargo vehicle I mentioned earlier, the Cygnus vehicle. It's about the size of a school bus. So it is full of cargo experiments, and then Kayla and I are running the arm to go grab that, and then the arm grabs it, and then we attach it to the space station. So water and any liquid behaves very differently in space. And so Kayla's showing the fun version of it, but a lot of the science actually has to do with the way materials combine and recombine in space, which is different than on Earth. And you can get some really fundamental physics properties understanding out of that. You have superhuman strength in space. So not only can you float, but you can also lift your crewmates. And if lifting them's not enough, you can even play catch with your crewmates. And this is inside the Japanese module called the GEM. And again, you can just see on the walls how there's just stuff everywhere. Kayla and I got to do a spacewalk together, which was really special since we had trained together. We were both in the same class. And so this is the first what we call all turtle spacewalk, where two people in our class is called the turtles. And so this was the first time we had 2 turtles out EVA at the same time. And what we were doing, our job was to put in new structure for new solar panels. It's called IROSA, but it's an improved solar panel structure to keep the station going until 2030 and to generate more power. So we're putting it on top of the old ones. We had new Soyuz crew show up. So about every 4 to 6 months, they rotate the Russian crews. And then right after they got there, it was time for another spacewalk. So Matthias and I did this one, and this was to fix a jumper, which is basically a pipe that we use for cooling. And so in the past, we'd had to disconnect it because it had a leak. And so Matthias and I were going back to put in a fixed one so we could get that cooling back. Then it was time for Mark to go home, and then a new crew showed up. And this was the first private astronaut crew from the US. It was called the Axiom 1 mission. So they're only there 7 days, but it was the first time that SpaceX launched a private mission to the International Space Station. So that was a pretty cool milestone. And then very shortly thereafter, crew 4 showed up. So we were crew 3, and crew 4 had 3 Americans and an Italian astronaut. And so they replaced us, and then it was time for us to get ready to go back home. So we're handing over command of the space station to the new crew. We have about a week of overlap with them where we sort of go over the updates of things, and then it's time for us to get back in our Dragon and head home. We had a few minutes of spare time there where we could play around, enjoy some, last few minutes of weightlessness in the suits before they got a lot heavier when we got back home. So the undock sequence is very similar to the docking sequence, except in reverse. So we get back into the spacecraft. We've also loaded up with cargo. So when you see views underneath our legs, you can see it's full of cargo. But it's not just us. Anything that's especially like the human research or tissue, things like that, that we want to get back quickly, come back with us. So again, that's the same place we docked originally. The hooks unlatch and we back away. And you can see the external view there. That's what the HD version looks like. This is from the space station looking at the Dragon. The solar panels on the back, that's called the trunk, that separates from the vehicle before we re-enter, and that jettisons and that burns up on its own, and then that leaves just the heat shield on the bottom of the spacecraft exposed. We also close the nose cone back up before we actually re-enter. So we had about under a day of time that we really enjoyed in the spacecraft, is that's the last time we got to see the Earth from that view. Then it was time to strap in. You can start to see the plasma outside the window there building. That's what that looks like, chunks, sparks coming off. We landed at night, so this is infrared imagery. The way we land in the SpaceX capsule in the water, and so we use parachutes to slow us down. So there's 2 drogue chutes that stabilize the capsule, and then 4 main parachutes that slow us down to about it feels kind of like getting pushed in the back hard enough that you would fall over. If someone came up and pushed you from behind, that's what it feels like to splash down. Sort of like being in a rear-ended car crash, but you're wearing seatbelts, so you don't really move. You just feel the force. As soon as we splash down, you'll start to see the capsule bob a little bit. The parachutes will jettison, and then you'll see boats come over towards us. So first, the boats have to make sure there's no toxic gases. So there's fuel and things in the Dragon. So first, they have to make sure it's safe for the recovery crew. And once they do that, then a bigger boat will come, and divers get on top of the capsule and they attach ropes to it. And then the boat pulls those ropes onto a recovery ship. You can see it kind of looks like a toasted marshmallow there. That's from the heat and the reentry. But this exact same capsule is actually on orbit right now. So this was Endurance. This was the first flight of that particular capsule. And they reused the capsules. And so Crew 5 actually flew that same capsule and is attached to the space station right now on the ISS. When we come out, we're readapting. So they'll usually have us sit down or lay down, because you can stand up, you have the strength, but your balance is really off. And so it's not uncommon to start to tip over or fall over. So to make sure we don't injure ourselves, it's just safer to have us come out on a gurney. Some pictures at night. We see sunrise and sunset 16 times a day. We can see the northern lights and the southern lights pretty much every day whenever you're at the extremes of the orbit. And if you're in eclipse, you can see that. And just an amazing time. So this was why the cupola on the space station was our favorite place, is you get views like this of the Earth. Those are the solar panels, and you can see what's called the Terminator line. And this is what it looks like when the sun is going down. You start to see the layers of the atmosphere as it refracts. And then at night, you can see both the city lights and then lightning all over the globe. So just an amazing view, and yeah, something we missed as soon as we got home. With that, I will stop the screen sharing and turn it over to you guys for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chari. That was indeed profound, quite inspiring for all our young learners. Right now, we will move ahead with our question and answer session, and we will begin with our youngest learners. Venkat and Myra both have a question for you. So, Venkat, you may ask your question to Mr. Chari.
Okay. So, firstly, yes, I do agree. It was really profound. And starting with a bit of myself, I'm Venkat Patnaik, and I'm 9 years old currently, and I'm a space enthusiast. I've qualified Microsoft technology exams in 5 programming languages.
Wow.
And yes, I have completed an online course from MIT, engineering the space shuttle. So it's more onto the space shuttle. I'm a citizen scientist by NASA, and I'm also about to complete my internship on the same subject, so I can understand a lot of this technical stuff, to be honest. We'll quickly begin with my question. So, during the docking of the Crew 3 spacecraft, I'm pretty sure you must have experienced a lot. What is the required procedure, and what has SpaceX done any differently from the previous spacecrafts like the Soyuz or the Space Shuttle or the other spacecraft that have flown to the International Space Station or have docked with each other?
Gotcha. So really good question. The everyone, so just the physics of the problem mean there's you can implement different design. There's different design implementations, but the physics are essentially the same. So one thing, if you're familiar with orbits, there's what's called a V bar and an R bar. So as you're approaching the space station, one way of docking is coming on what's called the R bar, which is radially from above or below. Another approach is to come along what's called the V bar, which is straight in the direction it's going. And so the shuttle did V bar approaches. Early on, there was some back and forth with there's pros and cons to each in terms of fuel consumables. And so initially, SpaceX wanted to do R bar, then went back to the V bar, and then eventually now they can do both. So that was one of the things to talk about, is like how do you want to implement that, and what is the least technically risky and most fuel margin to do on the first few until you are confident the system worked, and then add in more. SpaceX had the benefit of using, you saw there's Crew Dragons, the ones we fly in with us, but there's also Cargo Dragons. And so a lot of the same technology that we use in the Crew Dragon, they could use on the Cargo Dragons as sort of background test. And then once we had confidence in it, use that as a system. But in terms of what they do that's technically different, so the physics are the same. What is a little technically different is what sensors they use to actually do the docking. And so Boeing uses a different system than the Soyuz. The Soyuz has kind of a back and forth, I'd say, computer that's talking between the two spacecraft that's telling it parameters. The Boeing uses sort of like a image recognition type system, and the SpaceX uses what's called a LiDAR system, which is using reflectors to get its solution. But they all have slightly different technical implementations on how to get the things you really need are range and range rate. Like how far are you and how fast are you moving in relation to the thing you're trying to target, and then what's the attitude adjustments you need, and for like what are you pointing. And so you need data that tells you those errors and then correct those errors. So and they all have slightly different ways they get that data, but the overall physics and how you do it is the same.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
Yep, you bet.
Thank you, Venkat. Yes, Myra, your question now.
Yes, thank you, Miss Cinderella, and a very good evening, Mr. Raja Chari. So here, Myra Khattar saluting you for such a commendable job. I must say, like, it's a very emotional moment for me, and I believe for you, when your rocket takes off and when it lands back, because it's like a lot of training, as you said. So again, a big salute. And moving forward, I'm a space enthusiast, and I love space since I must be a baby. So you can say that, in fact. And I just want to ask you that, like, many scientists have, made up theories about that moon is made up of Theia, which is the twin planet of our Earth. So I just want to really know if it's like just theories or it's true. So that's my question.
Man, so I don't honestly know the answer. I think that's part of the reason we have to keep studying it. So we do geology training as part of our ASCAN training, and the reason we have to be these functional geologists, I wouldn't say we're expert geologists, the astronauts, but we have to be functional, because when we get to the moon or we get to Mars, we can't take the entire geology community with us, the real experts. So we have to be able to do two things. One is to see an area and really quickly know what are the key things to bring back, like understand what processes, geological processes may have happened, and know what samples they would be the best bang for the buck, because we can't bring it all back. We're going to have really limited ability to bring back samples until we have a longer term presence on the moon. And the second reason is because we have to be able to communicate with those people. And so we have to have a shared vocabulary and a shared understanding. And so if I, without geology training, if I were to just get out and say, hey, there's a gray rock here and a black rock here, which one do you want? That's not very descriptive. And so we have to be able to use the terms the geologists use and talk about, very specifically, like I see some crystallization on this, and giving them size and location and layout, and that helps them build a mental picture of what we're talking about and what we're seeing. Because the other thing on the moon is, like, you're not going to have super HD real-time camera views of everything we're saying. So a lot of it's going to be what we're describing that helps us make that connection. But to your original question on the origins of the moon, I think just with the last few weeks, there's been some new theories and new papers that have come out. I think as we continue to bring back samples, I've heard everything from the theory you mentioned. I've heard some say that it hasn't changed at all. So I don't think we really know for sure. Just like we continue to learn new things about the Earth, even though we've lived here the whole time, we still find new discoveries that surprise us. So I think that's, to me, one of the cool things about exploration and why there's such this human passion to want to go find out what's out there. And I think for the Artemis program, I mean, the Artemis 1 launch hopefully is here November 16th. So right around the corner, the rocket rode out the hurricane this time, and everything seems okay. Very quickly we'll have data back on that's a somewhat risky test flight. This is why there's no people on it. So if that all goes well, then we'll be looking to send people back to the moon shortly, within the years, and definitely by the time you guys are in college and out in the world, we'll hopefully be having humans on the moon long term.
Yes, totally true. And thank you so much for answering that. Lots of love and light. And I believe that sky is not our limit. As you said, that we should keep exploring, because why sky is not the limit? Because we see footprints on the moon. And yes, recently I've been exploring a lot. And due to that, I landed in the World Space Week, and I was awarded as the best presenter by NASA. And I was also the youngest presenter there. I actually created my own idea on my very own rocket, which is the roaring rocket. So it has some features which I reincarnated from another rocket by NASA. So credits to them, and credits to my school for hosting such a lovely session and for putting me more into research work. Thanks to that, and thanks to everybody, especially you and the Lord, which is watching us from above. So thank you so much.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you, Myra and Venkat, for the introduction today and for the awesome work you guys are doing. So you guys are crushing it. You're way smarter than I was.
Honored.
We'll move on to a few more questions. A lot of questions, Mr. Chari, on how does space look like? Is it a brilliant splash of colors, light? So we have very curious learners.
Yeah. So honestly, it's mostly just black with stars. So from the space station, our window looks down, so you don't really see the opposite way, up. There's no really up looking windows from the space station to look out into the black of space. But sometimes when we change the attitude of the space station for docking vehicles, you do have that view. It's mostly just black with stars. What is cool and where you do see a lot of the colors is on the Earth. So each of the continents has a very distinctive color. It takes a while to figure out where you're at over the Earth without cheating and using the map. I mean, you can obviously look at the computer and figure it out, but it's kind of a challenge amongst crews to be able to figure out where you're at without looking at a computer. And it takes about a month to do that, and you recognize the colors. And then the other really cool thing that I think everyone likes is at sunrise and sunset, you do get, as the sun goes down or up, it basically backlights all the layers of atmosphere, and that's a pretty brilliant it's an accelerated sunrise like you would see on Earth, but way more intense, and it covers the entire horizon of the globe. So that's pretty amazing. And to see the Earth either come back into sunlight or to go out of sunlight, what we call the terminator line, where the Earth is shaded or in insolation, that's always a favorite place to look. But otherwise, when you're in space, like most of our time, the vast majority of our time is in the space station. And so it looks just like you were in a lab, except there's stuff on all the walls. And you can actually forget you're in space because you're so busy that what I would do is when I went to the bathroom, I would go look out the window and remind myself, oh yeah, I'm in space, as you get so into the work and the science. And then when you're on a spacewalk is the other time that's very obvious you're in space. And most of the time on a spacewalk, even then you can't really see the black and the stars because you have helmet lights on. And so with the helmet lights, that and the space station has external lights, and those are all turned up. And so because it's very easy to get disoriented in eclipse on the outside of the space station, because you can be in any orientation. So on Earth, you always just naturally sort of know like which way is up. But in space, if it's dark and you're on the outside of the space station and you're working, since your body is just freely moving, you can very quickly get disoriented. And so we have the helmet lights and the external lights to kind of give you some sort of subconscious frame of reference. So a few times people, what you can do is when you're on the arm, you can turn off your helmet lights, and then that's kind of like the one time you can see the completely black sky background with the stars.
Thank you. In continuation to that, there are a few questions. Is the darkness in the space intimidating? Does it scare you?
I wouldn't say intimidating. I would say it definitely makes you realize how fragile the Earth's atmosphere is. So it is very. People call it the overview effect. I don't know if for me it was just not intimidating, not terrifying, more foreboding, I guess, maybe, to see. You can see all the Earth, and there's this super, super thin layer that's all the air, the atmosphere, that's everything, and then just black, and mostly just black. And so it just really reinforced to me how important that super thin layer is, and we're not doing a super great job as a species of preserving that. So we have to figure that out, because there's not much between us and a whole bunch of black.
True. On a lighter note, one question is a pretty interesting one. He asks that, sir, is it true that space smells like barbecue?
Yeah, so so space itself doesn't smell because there's no air, there's nothing in actual space. But yes, when you open the hatch when a new vehicle comes and you stabilize the pressure and you open the hatch, and when you come back in from a spacewalk and they open the hatch, I would describe it like gunpowder, or if you've ever begun to seen fireworks, and after the show, that smell, that's what it smells like. But it's not actually the smell of space. What we are pretty sure it's just oxidized. It's like any organic compound that was in the hatchway or on your suit, it oxidizes because there's no air and the process of depressurization. So that's what you're kind of smelling, kind of like a burnt smell is what it smells like.
All right. A lot of questions on what inspired you to become an astronaut.
So for me, I think when I was really young, like 5 years old, my mom had pictures of me dressing up like an astronaut. So I definitely had it at a very young age. I think probably the age of some of your students, I went away from that, thinking it wasn't realistic, and trying to sort of guard my expectations. But I really wanted to fly. I really got into the idea of wanting to fly airplanes. That's what took me to the Air Force Academy. And I still really like space. So kind of my thought was, I may not be able to be an astronaut, but I can definitely fly, and I can definitely do engineering that's space related. And so I did that, enjoyed it. And it wasn't until I was in test pilot school that there was people a little older than me. I was in test pilot school, but you had to be a graduate of test pilot school to apply. And it dawned on me that if I had been 6 months older, or 6 months further along and done with test pilot school, I would actually be able to apply to be an astronaut. And that kind of struck me as like, oh man, this is actually a thing there is a path to doing that. And so at that point, the next cycle is when I applied. But yeah, I think I always had sort of a desire to explore. I remember distinctly in 8th grade science, we got new tables in our classroom, new lab tables. Instead of having just desks, we actually had these long black tables that you could stand around and do experiments. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever, to have an actual lab. And so I think, just the idea of science and discovery is what really got me excited about it.
Great. And also, a lot of our students want to know, what is the roadmap in becoming an astronaut? I mean, what do we do? How do we take that path towards becoming an astronaut?
So I think step one is to find something you're passionate about doing, and just do that, and you'll be good at it and naturally progress. I think that that most of I think here most of us astronauts there's an element of luck that I don't know why they picked me. Everyone I interviewed with, and the way they narrow it down is in the last group of interviews. There's 50 people, and any one of those 50 people I would have picked over myself. I mean, not just saying that to be humble. Like legitimately, I think they would have done better than me. So I don't know, and I think everyone would tell you the same thing. What we did or didn't do, that's different. I think the one thing we do have in common is all of us are super excited. We're super passionate and excited about the jobs we were doing before we came to NASA. Everyone loved that. And I think for all of us, it was actually, everyone I think assumes that when you get the call from NASA, you're excited, you want to go, which you are. But all of us had this hang of like, oh man, I'm so happy I got called by NASA, but also a little sad that I'm leaving this world and this job that I really, really like. So I think that's the common thread is people really, really like the work they're doing. At a bare minimum, if you're trying to do specifically the astronaut path, you do need a master's degree at a minimum, and you need to have some kind of engineering or science degree, or be a medical doctor. So that's like from a minimums in terms of applying. But other than that, it's it's pretty wide open. I mean, just in my class, we had a biologist, a geologist, an oceanologist, aerodynamics. Tom's a physicist. So we have all kinds of different. There's a chemist in the office. So really all over the map. And we have, I mean, about a third of us are military, but well over half are civilian backgrounds. So there's not really one way. We have like an epidemiologist, who did like disease research. So like all over the place. And I would say even, that's the science engineering thing is only if you're doing the astronaut, but NASA has all kinds of people doing all kinds of work that's not even engineering or science related, whether it's the business side, the management, so contracting officers, the program managers, all we have to manage. Each NASA center is like a small city, so anything you would have in a city, you have that function, people doing that. So, and there's lots of people doing lots of different jobs within NASA as we try to get back to the moon.
Thank you. And there are questions like, there is a certain amount of academic rigor when you are, wanting to be an astronaut. Other than that rigor, what are the areas one should focus on if we are passionate about taking astronomy as our profession?
So I think you're right. The academic part is one thing. I think the two other big pieces, one is the people skills. So if you think about, especially as we talk about Mars, but even the moon and even on the space station, but having to live and work with people in a very small space for 6 months to a year and a half to 2 years, that's probably honestly more important than the technical skills. So a lot of the reason it takes so long when we hire astronauts is we do a whole bunch of psych evals, personality stuff, team evaluations, if you will, to see if we can actually be highly functional in a group. As you could imagine, I mean, if you were in a camping with someone, because the capsule, the Orion capsule is about the size, about the equivalent area of a 4-person tent, a small camping tent. And if you're going to spend a year and a half confined, you really have to be able to get along and work through anything, like work through any issues. I mean, actually probably more functional than even with your family. And so, like, for example, like in the Dragon capsule, and I can't show you, well, it won't work, but like in the Dragon capsule, like one person's going to the bathroom, there's a privacy curtain, but like, I mean, Kayla and I's head was essentially up to here, but just with a curtain between us while one of us is going to the bathroom. So you have to get really comfortable being really close all the time and being okay with that. And so I think that's one of the really big pieces that is underestimated, but we get it, like NASA, the community gets it. But it's you have to really, and you have to really buy into it as opposed to just saying you do it. It's one thing to say like, oh, I'll get along with people, but you actually have to live it and be able to do that. The other piece is having some elements. So, I mean, rarely do we have, you won't see any astronaut biographies that they were, had maybe multiple PhDs, but had no real world experience. So there's a mix of academic rigor, but with some kind of what we call operational experience. And when I mean operational, it's something where you've had to manage risk and reward in a dynamic environment. So like an example, like Woody Hoberg in my class, he did mountain rescue in Yosemite, right? So he's a brilliant aerodynamicist, but he also would go do help with life and death situations, rescuing people in the wilderness. And so a very, an ability to take in a situation and analyze risk and understand where you should take risks and how do you mitigate those risks. And that's, I think, years ago when most of the astronauts originally were test pilots, it's because of that skill set. That's the whole job of a test pilot. Is like clearly the safest thing to do is do nothing, never take off. But that's not really an option. You have to take off. So how do you mitigate risks and approach things in a manner that minimizes what you can and accepts what you can't, and balance. We're also not looking for reckless, right? So there's people who take gambles. That's not what we're looking for. So going out and doing crazy things doesn't mean just if you're like have a PhD and you go do crazy stuff. That's definitely not what we're looking for. It's being able to think under pressure, execute under pressure, reset under pressure. So we make a lot of mistakes in training in the Air Force as well. So very common in an Air Force training mission. If you didn't come back and something hadn't gone wrong, that meant you hadn't really tried hard enough. You hadn't pushed yourself far enough. And so the same kind of thing we do in NASA training is we are really pushing to the individual, the team to break, and then to kind of figure out, okay, how do we fix that next time?
I think actually we talk about these life skills which are actually utilized and used during these, these sessions. I believe when you go out for these expeditions, that is when your actual life skills are put to use: teamwork, trust, and everything, right?
Yep, so absolutely. Yeah.
We keep talking about this with our students, so it's so great for this validation. Another question which is coming is, can a space station move in only one direction, or can it move back and forth?
So we can move it in any direction. You can do it so even if you only had one set of thrusters, right, you could still change the attitude of the space station and fire those to get thrust in any direction. But in our particular case, we actually have thrusters on multiple axes. So you don't have to maneuver the station. You can just do different combinations of thrust. On the Dragon capsule, we had 4 main thrusters, if you will, on the forward edge. So for big burns, like phasing burns when you're trying to align with the station or deorbit, you would reorient the vehicle to put those thrusters in the line of the velocity you're trying to change. But for just attitude control or small adjustments, those you would just use the thrusters you have all over the place.
Mr. Chari, a lot of questions on, have you experienced anything extraordinary in your space travel? Life beyond Earth, anything extraordinary?
Gotcha. I have not seen or found aliens, but I think there's probably some kind of intelligent life out there somewhere. Just statistically speaking, if trying to imagine an infinite universe that seems very unlikely there couldn't be something in the midst of infinity. So I think there's probably something out there. Whether or not we'll actually stumble across it, I don't know. And then I think the other, probably the most extraordinary thing from space I take, and I think the others would tell you the same, is it's seeing things out the window with someone else. So the shared experience. I think that's a very human thing. I mean, if you think about most of your life experiences, it's always, most of them probably have other people in them. And so there's one thing to look out the window and see like the city lights or the aurora, but it's much more memorable when you have someone else, like a crewmate, that you're taking that as a shared experience.
And what are your thoughts on life on Mars? Is there a possibility?
Oh yeah, I think there's a possibility. I'm not smart. Yeah, I'm definitely not smart enough to say definitively one way or another. I don't think there's little green people running around out there, but whether there's some kind of small cell structure, life structure, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
Okay, great. Another keen observer has noticed few interesting things, on your background. They're keen to know what are these, your background, the pictures, and
so these are planes. So that's the, let's see, I can't point. Let's see. That's an F-35. That's an F-15. That's an F-15. And then up above me that's a gun barrel from an F-35.
Great. I think we'll take the last question of the evening. What are the dangers in space travel, Mr. Chari?
So there's lots of them. Depends on time. So in terms of like normal mission to the ISS, probably the launch and reentry. So launch, we have an abort system. So that's how we mitigate that risk. If there's something wrong with the rocket, then we have an abort system now on the newer generation of vehicles. On reentry, we have all kinds of redundancy built into the parachute system. And that's what a lot of our training as the crew is in, how to invoke those different systems if there's something off nominal. In terms of time on the station or going to like Moon or Mars, then you start thinking about radiation is probably the big thing once you leave low Earth orbit, and the effects of radiation on your body. And then exercise. So we exercise about 3 hours a day on the station to offset the atrophy that would happen to our bones and muscles when there's no load on them. But as you go to the moon and when you go to Mars in an extended trip and maybe a smaller vehicle, we have the benefit on the space station of having, you saw that exercise equipment, some really robust equipment that gets all the major muscle groups exercise. But like the Orion capsule, you're in a small tent-like space. You can't have a huge bar and do huge muscular lifts. So figuring out how to avoid muscle atrophy and cardio atrophy on a long journey is, we have some ideas, but that's still a factor for the Mars, like a Mars type mission in a long duration, that we haven't totally, it's again, in that risk versus reward. We don't have a great solution. We have some solutions, but they definitely come with some risks and trade-offs with them. But yeah, I think radiation and just the effects of the atrophy on your body are sort of the big ones that happen from long duration flight.
Okay. Mr. Chari, can we extend for a few more questions?
Sure. Yep. I can go to, I can go to.
Okay. Could you recommend some reading for our young learners?
Oh man,
on those lines, some reading material, some books which we, children can refer to, students can refer to.
Yeah. So man, that's a good question. So kind of circling back to the question about the training, this is probably unique to me, and so I would take it with a grain of salt. But actually, what I find most useful is not the technical books. I kind of into like the neuroscience books. We actually just had a lady named Brene Brown come and talk to our office, and sort of how you work together as a team. So some of the books, it's called like Leaders Eat Last. There's I'm trying to think of the names, like Malcolm Gladwell, Stephen Dubner are some of the authors, but they're the people who sort of put together how your brain works with economics and with social like psychology, and how we're wired compared to how we actually interact with people, and sort of recognizing when your subconscious brain is trying to take over a situation, and the ability to sort of like extract your subconscious out of that and have your cognitive brain get engaged. And so that's kind of the stuff I think is appealing to me and helps with what I think is the more harder thing of long-term space flight. That's only my opinion. I think if you're looking for technical things on space flight, most of the like former Apollo astronauts have written books that are good. There's I think there's one called Failure is an Option. I'm not sure if that's the right title, but just talking about, again, that idea of you can't necessarily progress if you don't take some risk, and how do you manage that? See what else. Yeah, those are some rough ideas, but I would say I wouldn't take my reading list. I would say if there's something kids enjoy reading, you should keep reading that. Find something, because if it's painful for you to read, you won't finish the book.
Mr. Chari, a few of them wants to know, what is the favorite thing about living in space for you? What is
my favorite thing is floating. That's easy. Float while looking out the window would be my favorite. But then next is just the living is just being able to float around. So it takes a few weeks to be able to get good at it, but after then, it's just so efficient to just be able to float places. And yeah, when it comes back, it's you're really sort of a drag. Was it's like, oh man, I got to walk all the way over there. It's a pain. I can't just push off and like pop. Like you get to the point in space where like I said, it takes a while to figure out the body control and the moments. The right force based on how far something is from your center of gravity, and eventually your brain figures it out. And when you do, it's like a joy, because you can, I could see Kayla at the other side of the module, like do exactly the right push, and then it's like stick the landing right next to her and be there in like 2 seconds. Versus on the Earth, if I saw my wife across the hall, I'd be like, I got to get up, I got to walk. It takes me like 10, 15 seconds, which seems like not a big deal. But after you got used to being able to do that in a second and a half, it's kind of annoying.
Okay. And have you experienced a very scary moment, a challenging moment while, during your space travel? And if so, how did you, meet it? How did you counteract it?
Yeah, I think probably the highest, one of the higher tension moments we had was just a few days after we'd been there. There was an anti-satellite test, and it had created a debris cloud that was threatening the space station. So we had to get back into the Dragon capsule, shut the hatches in preparation to potentially come home if it had struck the space station. And I think the way we handled it was actually turned out to be a really good thing, because we crew 3 had worked through a lot of emergencies together in training, but we had never done thing as a whole crew. So it was actually a good chance for us to work to get to have that almost like a practice scenario, because we didn't wind up having to come back. But yeah, I think we handled it just as calmly as we would a simulation. I think that's part of the reason we do the training, is there was, yeah, I think that's why we do so much emergency training, is to be very calm and to just work through the problem versus like a panic. So I would say I've never seen, your question about backgrounds and how we pick people. I think that's part of the reason we screen for that. I mean, it's whether you get that experience being in combat, rescuing people in Yosemite, living in Antarctica, doing research on an ocean vessel that's gone for 4 months. There's different ways to get that experience, but I think the common thing is, if something goes really bad, do you just sort of, use the training and start working through the problem?
Okay. And now the last question, we'll let you go after this. How soon can one start preparing for being an astronaut?
Man, I think you could start as soon as you start reading. I mean, you guys, it sounds like you guys are well on your way just based on what Venkat and Myra told me. I mean, that's, I would say all that's part of it. Just building the experience base, the academic base. I mean, it's something you can do from now. And really, it's just having the passion in it and it being excited about it, which is something you can start really as soon as you can start talking, honestly, if it's something you're interested in. I would say, I would never, ever do something, in school or your career solely because you think that will make you more competitive to be an astronaut. That's because, again, there's so much luck involved. I mean, the chances, even if you're the most qualified person, there's still an element of being lucky enough because there's other qualified people. So I would never make decisions to do something only because you think that would make you a better, more competitive to be an astronaut. If you legitimately want to do those things because you think you enjoy them, then great, do that. Yeah, I think you could start now. Anyone who's watching this is probably well more. The fact that you could log in means you're old enough to read and talk. So yeah, you can definitely be preparing or doing stuff that would potentially lead to that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chari. Thank you for extending the session and taking on those extra questions. It was truly a profound session. I'm sure all of us have learned a lot. Have a lot of clarity on what and how we can move ahead. Thank you so much, and we would also like to thank Mr. John and Ms. Kimberly for all the support extended and for this lovely session. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Yeah, John and Kim definitely deserve the brunt of the credit for setting this up. So thanks to them. Thanks to you guys at school and Venkat and Myra. And you encourage you guys also to look at ISRO. I mean, ISRO is doing a whole bunch of activity in the next year as they look towards launching their first crewed flight. So there's a lot of exciting things happening here, but there's a lot of exciting things happening in ISRO right in your backyard there. So yeah, I got to meet the 4 cosmonauts in Russia. I'm not allowed to say their names, or not cosmonauts, the 4 Indian astronauts. So I'm not allowed to say who they are, but they're some great folks. So looking forward to seeing one of them launch.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chari. Have a great day ahead. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mr. John and Ms. Kimberly. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. That was wonderful.
Oh, it of course was.
It indeed
How
was.
nice is he? Did you guys have fun?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, definitely. It was
Yeah,
so
I love it.
informative and it was so fun and so cute when you guys celebrated Christmas in space. Yeah.
How funny was that? Their little packages, they had little hats. It's,
Yeah.
it's that amazing adaptability and being able to find the joy in whatever you do. And I think that's kind of what he was really talking about, for career choices. You have to
Exactly.
find the joy in what you do. You'll automatically be the best at whatever you love the most.
Yeah.
So if you're
I
looking for
think,
more books,
yes, thank you,
find
Kim.
the topics that bring you the most joy and read autobiographies, factual autobiographies of the people who have done the things you wish to do. That will always serve you well. It's been such an honor meeting you guys. Thanks for taking such great care of Raja and having such an inspirational program. We
Thank you
hope to
so
see
much,
you again
Kimberly.
soon.
Yes, looking forward to many such sessions. Thank you for being a part of today's session. Thank you, everybody. Venkat, Myra, Miss Anjali, and Mr. Raj Nandan
Yeah, you're welcome.
for
You're welcome.
all the preparation. Thank you. I think we will conclude the session right now. Right? Have
Love
a
and
great
light.
evening. Thank you.
You
Same to you.
too.
Have a
Bye.
great day and have a great future to everybody, including you, Kimberly. Great session. Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.